You live in a democracy. Your vote counts. Power transfers peacefully every 4 years. The system works, except it doesn't. Not the way you think. Here's a test. Imagine 80% of Americans agree on something. Overwhelming consensus. The kind of unity we never see on anything. Not healthcare, not taxes, not even whether water's wet. 80% want it. 20% oppose. What happens? If those 20% happen to be economic elites, the thing with 80% support has almost no chance of becoming law. I'm not speculating. In 2014, 2 Princeton researchers analyzed 1,779 policy decisions over 20 years. They tracked who wanted what before laws passed, then measured who actually got their way. When economic elites supported something, 60% chance of passing. When average citizens wanted it but elites opposed, 30% chance. When 80% of the public wanted something, elites didn't, near zero. Your vote was counted. Your voice was heard. But the outcome was decided by a completely different mechanism, one operating before you ever entered the room. Today we're showing you exactly how that mechanism works, where the filtering happens, why you never noticed, and why 2 parties isn't 2 choices. It's 0 choice about what actually matters. Before statistics proved this pattern, philosophers watched it unfold in real time. Athens, 399 BCE. Socrates, the man who essentially invented Western philosophy, stands trial for corrupting youth and disrespecting the gods. Translation: asking too many uncomfortable questions. 501 citizens vote. Result: 280 guilty, 221 innocent. Democracy has just sentenced one of its foundational thinkers to death. His student Plato watches this happen and identifies 3 ways democracy destroys itself. The first failure was chaos. Years earlier, a charismatic general named Alcibiades convinced the assembly to invade Sicily, hundreds of miles away. Every experienced advisor said it was suicide, but Alcibiades worked crowds beautifully. The speech won. The invasion was catastrophic. Thousands dead. Athens never recovered. Democracy couldn't resist an articulate disaster because persuasion was the only currency it recognized. The second failure was exhaustion. After the Sicilian disaster, Athens spiraled into paranoia. In 411 BCE, the exhausted assembly voted to suspend democracy itself, installing oligarchs. When that collapsed, they voted democracy back, then lost more wars, then accepted the 30 tyrants who executed 1,500 citizens in 8 months. Democracy became so exhausted by its own chaos that people welcomed tyranny because at least tyranny was stable. The third failure was the trial itself. Socrates spent his life asking, why does democracy keep choosing disaster? Why do crowds prefer comfortable lies over uncomfortable truths? The crowd voted to silence the question permanently. He drank hemlock and died. Plato's conclusion: democracy doesn't die from external attack. It becomes its own executioner. Now jump forward 2,300 years. French aristocrat Alexis de Tocqueville visits America in 1831 and sees intense political participation everywhere. Town halls, debates, elections for everything. But underneath, he notices something disturbing. All that activity happens within incredibly narrow boundaries. Certain questions never get asked. Certain options never appear on ballots. Step outside those invisible boundaries, and you're not executed like Socrates. You're just made irrelevant, mocked, dismissed as unrealistic. Tocqueville describes a power that does not tyrannize, but it compresses, enervates, extinguishes, and stupefies a people. Translation: people stay technically free. They vote, speak, participate. But the range of what those choices can actually accomplish gets narrower and narrower. And because it happens gradually through social pressure rather than dramatic suppression, no one notices the walls closing in. Same pattern Plato saw, just slower, more subtle, more complete. So here's the question: is this an accident, or is this just what democracy naturally does? let me show you the mathematical inevitability that creates two parties, and why awareness doesn't help you escape. City Council election. 3 candidates. Candidate A, build new park, 40% of votes. Candidate B, fix roads, 35% of votes. Candidate C, fund schools, 25% of votes. Candidate A wins. Park gets built. But notice, 60% of voters wanted something else. Roads stay broken. Schools stay underfunded. Most people lost. Next election, the roads and schools people start talking. They realize, we both agree the park was wrong. What if we run one candidate promising both roads and schools? Now they're 60% combined. They win easily. This isn't coalition building based on shared vision. This is strategic bundling to avoid losing separately. They don't actually agree on priorities. They've just calculated that losing separately is worse than compromising together. The park supporters see this and panic. They start bundling their idea with anything that gets them back above 50%. Tax cuts, business development, whatever it takes. Within a few cycles, you inevitably end up with 2 large coalitions. Not because people naturally divide into 2 camps, because the mathematics of winner-take-all elections makes any other configuration unstable. French sociologist Maurice Duverger formalized this in the 1950s. It's called Duverger's Law, and it's not a suggestion, it's a mathematical tendency as reliable as gravity. Winner-take-all elections naturally produce 2-party systems over time. Third parties don't disappear because voters are stupid or brainwashed. They disappear because voting for them becomes strategically suicidal. Vote for your true favorite when they have no chance, and you might hand victory to your worst nightmare. Here's the implication. Both major parties now contain fundamental contradictions. The Roads Schools Coalition includes people who profoundly disagree about priorities. They're not natural allies. They've done the math. You end up with 2 parties, and neither represents a coherent worldview. They're bundles of incompatible ideas held together by fear of the other bundle. And if you're born into this system, if it's the only version you've ever seen, it doesn't look like a trap. It looks like how politics naturally works. It looks like human nature. The math created the cage. Then the cage became invisible because no one remembers a time before it existed. But even understanding this perfectly doesn't free you, because your own psychology becomes part of the machinery. Here's where it gets truly insidious. The system doesn't just trap you externally through math, it conscripts your own mind to defend the trap from the inside. You've been voting for the same party for 10 years, screaming arguments with family, relationships damaged, holidays ruined, money donated, hundreds of hours watching debates, defending positions online. Part of your identity is built on these commitments. Then someone shows you the Princeton study. Shows you that 80% public support means almost nothing when elites disagree. Shows you the door was locked before you voted. You have 2 options. Option 1, admit you've wasted enormous energy. Admit you damaged relationships over something operating in a narrower range than you believed. This is psychologically excruciating. Option 2, generate reasons why it was actually crucial. Why differences are enormous. This protects you from pain. Your brain chooses option 2 almost every single time. This is cognitive dissonance. Psychologist Leon Festinger discovered it in 1957. When you've invested heavily in something and face evidence it's not paying off, your brain experiences unbearable tension. It defends the investment rather than questioning it. But here's where it gets darker. In the 1990s, researchers made a disturbing discovery. People don't just defend systems that benefit them, they defend systems that actively hurt them, especially when those systems feel permanent and unchangeable. They called it system justification theory. In their experiments, they manipulated how much control people felt over a system. The less control people felt, the more they rationalized the system as fair and legitimate. Critical point, when people feel powerless to change something, their brains cope by deciding it's actually fine. This doesn't happen because the system is fine. It happens because believing something is both unfair and unchangeable creates cognitive pain that's literally unbearable. Your brain adjusts what you believe about fairness instead of changeability. This is why people hold contradictions simultaneously. Congress is fundamentally broken, and voting is the most important duty. The brain keeps these quarantined so they never fight each other. Feeling defensive right now? Thinking of reasons why your situation is different? That's this mechanism activating in real time. So we have two layers working together. Mathematics creates two options. Psychology defends those options as meaningful. But there's one piece missing. Who decides what those two options even are? Let me make the invisible machinery visible. 20 candidates enter a presidential primary. 20 different visions for the country. Watch what happens as they move through the system. Filter 1. The money gate. First 90 days, 10 candidates vanish completely. Not because voters rejected them. Voters barely know they exist. They vanish because they couldn't raise money fast enough. National campaigns cost hundreds of millions. You need money for staff in multiple states, advertisements, polling, travel, events, digital infrastructure. No donor access means no campaign. It's brutally simple. Political scientist Thomas Ferguson spent decades documenting this. His finding: donor preferences filter out candidates before the first vote is cast. Platform threatens major donor interests, higher taxes, stricter regulations, industry breakups. You can't get funding to compete nationally. 10 faces vanish, eliminated by money, not voters. Filter 2. The media gate. 5 more drop because media labeled them unelectable. Everyone starts at 2 to 3% in polls before name recognition. That's normal. But watch what happens. Certain candidates get labeled serious contenders by major media. Others get labeled long shots or fringe candidates. Political scientists documented the momentum effect. Candidates media treats as serious get disproportionate coverage. More coverage increases name recognition. Higher recognition creates better polls. Better polls justify more coverage. Upward spiral. Dismissed candidates get minimal coverage regardless of ideas. They poll lower. Media points to low polls. See, we were right. Death spiral. They can't escape. Who decides which candidates are serious? A few dozen editors and producers at major networks and newspapers. Not millions of voters. A few dozen people making editorial decisions. 5 more vanish through the media filter. Filter 3. The early state gate. 5 remain. Then Iowa and New Hampshire vote. 2 states whiter, older, and more rural than the nation. About 1% of Americans. But they vote first due to historical accident, and results are treated as definitive. Early winners get instant fundraising surges. Underperformers watch donor support evaporate overnight. Media declares them finished. More donors flee. Self-fulfilling prophecy. Why these states first? No principled reason. Historical accident from the 1970s that calcified into permanent structural power. 2 more gone. What reaches you? By the time you vote, California, New York, Texas, any later state, 3 candidates remain. 17 filtered out by mechanisms you had zero input into. Your choice between the final 3 is real. Your vote counts in that narrow sense. But who decided which 3 survived? Donor networks, media narratives, historical accidents, not you. Now, you might be thinking, but sometimes outsiders do break through. Sometimes someone without establishment support wins. Fair point. The filters aren't perfect. History shows occasional candidates who mobilized unexpected support. Grassroots movements, new technologies, populist energy bypassing gatekeepers. But watch what happens after they win. How much fundamental structure actually changes. The system has a remarkable immune response. Once in office, they still operate within existing constraints. Donor networks, legislative procedures, bureaucratic inertia all remain. Personality might differ. Rhetoric might change. But boundaries of realistic policy, those rarely move. The funnel can bend under pressure, but the destination stays within predictable bounds. The filtering did its job. This is what that Princeton study actually measured. Not whether voting happens, but whether voting determines the range of options you can choose from. The answer is no. You see it clearly now. The mathematical pressure, the psychological defense, the structural filtering. That knowledge feels powerful, like you've escaped the matrix. But here's a question worth sitting with. What if understanding the trap perfectly doesn't help you escape it? What if awareness sometimes becomes another form of paralysis? Psychologists discovered moral licensing. When people did something virtuous, even just disagreeing with racist statements, they unconsciously gave themselves permission to relax later. In one study, participants who proved they weren't sexist were then more likely to choose a male candidate over an equally qualified woman for hiring. The virtuous act created permission to stop trying. Apply that here. You understand the constraints now. You can explain Duverger Law, describe the funnel. You're not naive like other voters who don't see the system. And that understanding can feel like you've done something meaningful, like you've taken action just by seeing clearly. But have you? Consider two people. Person A votes every election, believes it matters, doesn't overthink constraints, organizes, shows up, pushes for incremental change. Person B understands everything we explained, doesn't vote because it's rigged, feels intellectually superior, consumes analysis but takes no action. Who has more influence? Neither. Both respond to identical constraints. Person A built a narrative about duty. B built one about enlightenment. The funnel operates the same on both. Here's the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes understanding just makes you better at explaining why you're doing nothing. Analysis becomes a substitute for action rather than a catalyst. Meanwhile, people who don't overthink constraints keep organizing, showing up, and occasionally create actual movement even within them. I'm not telling you what to do, but be honest about the difference between understanding a system and changing it. Plato watched democracy execute one of its wisest voices. Tocqueville watched Americans participate intensely within invisible boundaries. Guylands and Page found 80% support means almost nothing when it conflicts with elite preferences. The pattern's been visible for 2,400 years. You live in a system where procedural elements work beautifully. Elections happen on schedule. Votes get counted accurately. Power transfers peacefully. Real differences exist between parties. Real consequences flow from which wins. But those differences exist within a pre-filtered range. So is it actually zero choice? In one sense, no. Real policy differences exist. Healthcare approaches differ. Tax policies differ. Environmental regulations differ. Immigration enforcement differs. These matter enormously to real people's lives. But in the sense that actually matters, who decides what options you can choose from in the first place? Yes, it's zero choice. You're not choosing whether to have healthcare covering everyone. Both options already removed that from the menu before you voted. You're choosing incrementally different versions of the current system. You're not choosing whether to fundamentally restructure campaign finance. Both options depend on the current system for existence. You're choosing which party's donor networks get slightly more influence. You're not choosing the bandwidth of possibility. You're choosing which channel to watch within a preset bandwidth. The door stays locked, not because democracy failed, but because democracy is working exactly as designed when choice has been filtered before you encounter it. The illusion isn't that your vote doesn't count. It absolutely counts, in selecting between pre-approved options. The illusion is believing those options represent the full range of what's possible. They represent what survived the filtering process, what's acceptable to those controlling the filters. Could this change? Other democracies use ranked choice voting, proportional representation, public campaign financing. Our system isn't written into physics. It's contingent, designed by people, maintained by institutions, which means it can be different. But here's the recursive trap. Changing it requires gaining political power through the very system that filters out people wanting to change it. Not impossible. Just designed to resist exactly the transformation that would threaten its structure. What you do with this information is genuinely your choice, not a choice from a filtered menu. Some will keep participating, recognizing constraints but working within them because incremental improvements still matter. Some will disengage and build alternatives, mutual aid networks, cooperatives, local organizations outside the two-party system. Some will do both, participate strategically while building alternatives, never mistaking participation for power. And some will do nothing differently because understanding a system doesn't automatically tell you how to change it. But at least now, you see the structure clearly. You're not choosing from unlimited options. You're choosing from two curated bundles that survived a filtering process you never consented to and cannot control. That's not zero choice in the literal sense. But it's zero choice about what matters most. Who decides what choices you get to make? That's where power actually lives. The question isn't whether you understand this now. You clearly do. The question is whether understanding changes anything at all.